Before we get started, I just want to acknowledge we're on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Eastern Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to ancestors and elders and any First Peoples here today. First Peoples sovereignty was never ceded and always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Look, we lost Tania, and that yeah, but we found her, so we're happy about that. But I'm just gonna actually refer to my notes because I'm a little bit flustered at this point. But look, I don't know if you, I'm really happy that you guys are here. We put on this program, Future Memorials. If you don't have a program, there's some out the front. And before I forget, I just want to say, if you have a chance, go and see some of the artworks that are still up. I should also say, if you don't know who I am, I'm Amy Spears, and I work at RMIT School of Art. And with Jodie Haynes and Auntie Vicky Cousins and a few really rad people at RMIT, we put together this program. We had just a desire to speak back a little bit to the city with Future Memorials. We've had some experiences which we won't get into today, but the idea that it would be nice to see the city program some more bold public art around, I guess, First Peoples and their cultural resurgence, but also around truth-telling. Sometimes you see in the news that the City of Melbourne's mayor has committed to reinstating the Batman Memorial or repairing a Cook monument or something like that. And it just sort of, after a while, kind of annoys you. And so with this public program, we wanted to imagine the future memorials that we would like to see. And it's been really exciting. Academia is not always fun, but this has been a really fun program to be part of. And for instance, yesterday, dropping Brooke Wandon's banner on the Care car park. If you get a chance to see it, just go to the car park and look up. And it's a beautiful banner honouring the eels. It's eel migration season. Brooke, I don't want to ruin this. Is it eok? Is that how, yeah, eok? Yuk. Yuk is the word for eel. And it's been really nice to work with Wurundjeri artist Brooke Wandon on her project. And so after this keynote, you can go and see the banner on Care Car Park, but you can also see her projection. It should be dark enough. And it's only up for one more night, so hopefully you get a chance. We've piloted some fun artworks, and hopefully we get, the idea is to make it so tantalising people want to see more of it, right? But we've also got Jodie Haynes' work down at the Tunaminawait and Moybeana Monument. It's on a little kind of multimedia screen called Storybox, and it's up for a week-ish. So you'll have a chance to see that for a while, but I do encourage you to go see it tonight. Vicky Cousins did a beautiful work yesterday. It was a one night only. If you missed it, I'm sorry. But it was a lovely kind of fire and yarning circle. And weaving workshops and music and food sharing. And we also had a lot of fun. I did an artwork, and it was about First Peoples reserved parking. And it was imagining a kind of different form for memorials about acknowledging unceded lands and allowing First Peoples somewhere to park on their country. And my favourite part of yesterday was Uncle Bill Nicholson coming to do the welcome and being able to park in a First Peoples reserved parking. That was pretty fun. I'm not sure if many people in this room are aware of Tania Willard's work. I mean, she's incredible. I had the great fortune to meet her last year when I did a 6-week trip through Canada. And I actually met Tania on Bush Gallery, and she put us to work immediately. We planted some sunflower seeds. But it was a really nice way to meet a really kind of inspiring and kind of enabling artist. I think Tania has a lot to offer us in terms of thinking about, ways to make work that's respectful to land and to First Peoples, but also, I know today Tania gave a really good workshop for our Indigenous PhD students, and you could just tell that people were feeling, I don't know, some level of permission to deal with some of the difficulties of the archive or of colonial trauma, but do it in a kind of joyful and culturally resurgent way. I meant to ask Tania how to say this, but Tania Willard is a mixed Secwépemc. I did practice Secwépemc. Okay. I apologize. Yeah, please. And an artist and creator whose research intersects with land-based art practices. Her practice activates connection to land, culture, and family, centering art as an Indigenous resurgent act through collaborative projects such as Bush Gallery, hopefully she talks about that today, and support of language revitalisation in her community. Look, I'll let Tania talk to you. She's amazing. Thank you so much for being with us today. And cheers.
All right, well, great. It's good to be here, especially since I got lost in this beautiful place. I am going to make sure to stay on time because I understand we could have a little bit of time to have questions and conversation after, which is my favorite. So, hello everyone. I greet you in my language, Secwépemc. It's really an honor to be here in Wurundjeri land. We call our land Tamiuch, and Tamiuch is kind of an ancient word for Salish languages, so it means more than land. It means so much about our life and connection and love, I'll say. And Dr. Jeanette Armstrong, who's a Syilx scholar from one of the interior Salish nations, she talks about this word appearing throughout British Columbia and other areas in distinctly different Indigenous languages. But what we share is our word for the land, because it's an ancient word and it forms so much of our identity. So I'm coming from Secwépemc territories, which is quite a ways away. We call our territory Secwépemc Utluch, and the Utluch part refers to our land, our culture, our language, our governance that is centered in our territories as a land base, as a place that gives life, as an abundant center. And for colonial geography, it's in the province of British Columbia in Canada, and about 5 hours northeast of Vancouver. And so I moved back there from working and living in Vancouver for about a decade, but I was raised within some of the non-Indian reserve places in my territory, so some of the towns. Always connected to my dad, who lives on and where I live now, which is Nisconlith Indian Reserve. So for people who don't know, in Canada, there's a system of colonization that is a current policy that we live under and through and combat all the time. But it's the Indian Act, and so it's a policy and colonial framework that makes a lot of legal situations for our land. And so the Indian Reserve is historically a place of surveillance. The Indian Reserve represents very little of our traditional territory. It's where Indigenous peoples were grouped together, our land was dispossessed, and we have these still today, the Indian Reserve. But when I was curating and working with Indigenous artists in the city, I wanted a chance to think about the shortcomings of what I was doing. So I had a chance to curate some nice scale exhibitions in major urban centers in Canada, but I started to also look around. I had 2 young children at the time, my 2 sons, and it became really clear that the kind of Western art model system wasn't as expansive as I wanted it to be, maybe, is what I'll say. And that turning to Secwépemc aesthetics and ideas and knowledges actually created more space for intergenerationality, for me to have my family, for me to work between disciplines, between curating and being an artist. And so it just became this really fertile ground for me to break through these kinds of barriers and separate disciplines that I was encountering in my practice, and really start to think about things more holistically. And when I started to question that space, the White Cube Gallery, it made room for me to really kind of come into this place of framing my practice very differently. And that is really something I owe to my land and my family and my community and everything that has held that place together. And so in resituating my practice and centering Indigenous territoriality, so not, I wasn't programming in the White Cube and asking people to come to the show. I started to go like, oh, well, I'll just do it in our places and start from that center instead. Because the other ways felt like it was always compromised. And I still work in galleries, and I work with a gallery at UBC Vancouver, University of British Columbia, recently as the curator director, but I'm also full of questions and challenges to galleries, and that's partly due to a love of the potential and the power of art. And so in questioning this space, the model we started to use for a gallery was this idea of a bush gallery. And my land didn't have running water or services at the time. That's something that I invested in as I moved out of the city. But we got together a few artists and we worked on this like deeply collaborative project, which was a set of questions about what a gallery could or should be. And of course, many of you artists in this room were always asking that question of art. But it became this really productive space for me to have my young children there, other artists who had children, and to think collaboratively, not just as humans and not just centering that, but to also look at the ecologies around us. And so we live in a drier interior forest, lots of pine trees and fir trees, and where I live is situated amidst that. So it really was a revaluing of my traditional home and land that allowed me to be in that space. And this idea of bush gallery is expansive enough and transdisciplinary enough to contain that. And so this image is just a small cyanotype that I did with bush here, written out using pine needles and just some different, these are actually chicory flowers, and then a film of the forest. And we started working with cyanotype. We were doing this camera-less photography, in part because when we started, we just didn't have a lot of resources to draw on. So, I did have lots of sunshine and not running water, but water from the creek. And so cyanotype was a really direct process we could use to sort of archive our work together at this artist residency. But in a way that was not immediately consumable. So, cyanotype is a bit interpretive. It's working kind of against the grain of our ultra HD, image consumption these days. And of course, started by a woman with one of the first volumes of photography, Anna Atkins, and her work with British mosses and seaweeds and things. And so there was just this, and also Edward Curtis, who's a noted American photographer who did a lot of romanticized images of Native people in North America. He would, in the field, use cyanotype. And so we sort of drew on some of these connections, and it was a material that worked really well for us. And we started to talk about them as being developed in the sovereign sun. And so I'm often, the space of the land, the Timiuch, has allowed me to kind of situate myself differently, to see things differently, and this is also through my work with our community and working together with others who want to revive different practices, who want to work with supporting Indigenous languages. And I do this work, importantly, in the community, and I'm not a leader for Indigenous languages. I am somebody who just helps support, but they also help me see and reflect the values of Secwépemc people and the land, and then how we extend that from that specificity to relating to how we can all develop better relations with our landscapes in ways that are really critical at this moment. And so another thing that has come from my collaborations there, this collaborations with the sun, this is a collaboration with the wind. And so this was a project called The Liberation of the Chinook Wind. And that title takes its name from a story that was recorded by anthropologist James Tate in the late 1800s from an unnamed Secwépemc man, Secwépemc and French, I believe. And they actually recorded a number of stories without recording that man's name. And actually, James Tate wasn't the same kind of anthropologist who kind of helicoptered in and wrote things and left. And, you know, there's many questions about ethics of that. He actually was married into the nearby Gunditjmara community. And so it's interesting that this name has been lost. Anyway, this story that was written, The Liberation of the Chinook Wind, a lot of our stories are coyote stories. And in this story, the people are cold and they want to release the warm southern wind. And they go and they release the southern wind. And then actually there's a pattern of wildfires and they outrun these and release and the land becomes warm. But this story also was a way for me to work through collaborations with the wind. I was asked as an artist to contribute to a project which the curatorial prompt was asking each artist to respond to the Beaufort scale of wind. So we were assigned, some people know this scale. So we were assigned a different wind measurement. Mine was like, I can't remember the number, but it was strong wind. And my impulse thinking through this story was to think about the wind. In that story, the wind, and in our thinking, the wind is an animate being. And the wind is also like a lesser known, scientific place of study in terms of a warming climate or a weirding climate or whatever you want to say about the climate emergency we're in. And so I wanted to work with the wind in this way that recognized its agency. And so to do that, I decided the wind could write poetry. In the early iteration, I just cut up a national park book and cut words out of it and threw them in the wind and then, wrote down and created a poem just based on where they fell. But through this project, I was able to work with some people who were doing coding, and we created a word bank from a number of settler management documents and Indigenous land rights documents. So I developed a series of words that were plucked out of these documents, and then based on the wind measurement of the day, and I got to work with University of Mississauga, who had their own weather station on campus. And so we were able to match, the wind measurement throughout the day in order to create these stanzas and create poetry. So these are completely generated by the wind. This project is a few years old, so it was sort of before we're in this period of like generating with AI and generating prompts and texts and thinking about that. And so it kind of occupies this interesting place now because there's no artificial intelligence. There is the authorship of the wind in this work. And started to write some really beautiful combinations. Some maybe made less sense, but we had a website. You could go to it and look at the poetry of the day. The wind wrote a poem every 4 days. I wanted to follow the calls for labor for a 4-day work week and to think about our creative souls and the breaks we need, the rest we need to create. And so they asked me to write it 7 days a week, and I was like, hold on, let's give this artist the wind a break. And so, I generated a poem every 4 days, and actually was up for 3 years. And so there's a digest of poems that were written by the wind. This one is for a show I did at Southern Alberta Art Gallery in Lethbridge, Alberta, the neighboring province to British Columbia. And when I thought about how I would, so this is after the project had closed, and I was like, how will I use these poems for this show? And so I decided that the way I would do that was by making an ink from berries that grow around me. So I made this ink and then applied it directly on the wall to write out the poem. So, because I just didn't want to use material that wasn't kind of like also based in where I was. So this is a berry ink writing this poem. And, you know, like I love this, like medicines in 4 areas and different, and then it also was talking about climate change. The wind was also talking about climate change in its poetry. This is an installation of that exhibition, so the poems on a wall we're not seeing. But I wanted to show this installation shot. It relates to some later work that I'll talk about that's at the Sydney Biennial. I just came from Sydney and installed a work, and I thought it'd be interesting to also talk about this work in the way that also this discussion of memorials is a bit transitory. And I'll talk about some of this work in relation to these themes. But in the space of the gallery, I'm often thinking about what is contained in the gallery, what's not, and trying to relate to the outdoors. And so in this case, I covered every single window, and they were difficult measurements. It's like a historic kind of window situation up there. But I covered every window because then you can really see the change in the light and you pay more attention to it. And so these works had different texts on them and were able to be animated. They changed at night. You couldn't see them that well inside, but they were glowing outside. And there's a transitory population in the park who don't come in the gallery, and so it had these different functions. This is another artist who kindly posed for this photo because they were wearing a really good fringe jacket. But the text on this one says, prayer, smoke, smoke, prayer. And this color and project was also the color of fireweed flowers. And fireweed throughout Canada, they emerge in marginal soils and also after a wildfire. And so I'll touch on this in some other works, but I live in an ecology shaped by fire. And that practice of relations with fire has been suppressed, I think very similar to here, for a long time. And it's now created an explosive situation where wildfires are much more damaging than they would be had the relations and our cultural burning practices not been suppressed. This is a little blown out, but I talked about cyanotype. I also have experimented with anthotypes, which is, I'm really into the photography of like 150 years ago, but anyway, an anthotype is using different vegetable or fruit juices to create an image. They're long exposures, so a cyanotype you can develop in 10 to 15 minutes outside in strong UV light. An anthotype, I'm really into them because they take, some I've had developing for like a month. And so there's this long exposure that I'm interested in, and this fading and weathering and, being, it's really a collaboration again with light and with, in this case, berries. So you can make an anthotype with lots of different things like turmeric and spinach and different things. But I wanted to use things from my territory, and we love our berries. We love berry picking, and they give us so much sustenance, and it's also joyful and fun and intergenerational. And so I wanted to use berries in my anthotypes. And I don't always name them, or if I name them in our language, because some of these are also susceptible to wild harvest that is not Indigenous-led and becomes quite extractive. And so some of our traditional food sources can be impacted by commercial pickers. And so there's kind of like this subtext in all these works that talks specifically about some of the situations on our land, and some of it is more overt, and some of it is more on the kind of specificity of of me being able to talk about the work or my interaction with my community, and so centering that as well. This is another piece that is a project I did. It's kind of it's a culmination of a couple different projects, and so I really think about my curatorial and artistic work as strategically as I can, so that I can bring funding and support to not only projects I want to do, but to projects that are impactful for our community, and especially for some of the elders and cultural workers who support language in particular, language and culture. And so, and for me to spend time to do that. like time it's such a, maybe that's why I'm interested in these long exposures in some ways with alternative photography, is like we're in such a different relationship to time under capitalism, under kind of modern conditions in the city. And I try to rupture that at different times and through strategically working in certain ways. And so I wanted to learn more about plants at home. I spend some time because I have the gift of living at the edge of our forests, and I want to learn more about plants and things that that people around me know, but my ancestors, it would have been more commonplace knowledge. But it's not knowledge that's valued or within the academic system, and nor should it be. It needs to be in community. And so I'm always looking for ways that I can spend time with community and with land. And so this project allowed me to do that by learning about different plants and brewing different teas. And so I had a sovereign tea, I had a decolonial tea, and it's not just picking this rose hips, wild rose, and then this is fireweed. I mentioned fireweed leaves that have been fermented, but I picked them like after they fell, after the wind, as the seasons are changing, and after they fell, and then processed these ones, fermented them. So it's also about paying attention. It's also being present on my land, which is itself a continuation of my ancestors' fight for our land rights. And so I started to realize that even the positive opportunities of the work I was getting in the city to curate and make work were still displacing me in a way, because those things didn't exist at home. And so there's all these ways, need to get a job, need safety for family, all these ways in which we are pushed out from our places we call home, even though that's still within the confines of the Indian Reserve. And so I wanted to do this project to kind of work against that. So this is also thinking about different impromptu economies, like some people sell bannock at the powwow, that's a fry bread, or have different things that they're selling, kind of the part-time work and or the market. So I also grow a lot of garlic where I live. And so I was really thinking about those kinds of labor economies where you're kind of in the market, doing a market on the weekend in different cultural ways. And so this project kind of culminates a few of those things. And I started to look at this idea of future berries. So a you-pick farm is like where you don't just go buy the basket or whatever, you go and you pick it yourself. And so this idea of future berries is a kind of, in the work at Southern Alberta Art Gallery where I worked with that fireweed, there was also a text in those windows that was about future berries. And so I'm thinking about future harvests and thinking about the plant world really as a space of futurity and abundance. That's just a detail. This is 8 deer hides. So I will touch on some of my work with deer hides. I didn't process these ones myself, but I did hand cut them all anyway. And yeah, they're a meditation on these kinds of economies and spaces. Here's Amy and Leah. I wanted to say I have the gift sometimes of having people come visit me at my home, which is the site of Bush Gallery, but it's also my home. And I saw this picture when I was putting my things together, Amy, and I was like, oh yeah, you guys planted right away those sunflowers. I didn't even entirely remember what we planted, but they did really well, and they're a Hopi blue dye sunflower, and they are used, Hopi people use them, as far as I know. That's far away from me, but for dye, and they're really beautiful, and they really liked growing at home there. And I'm subsequently going to try to make some ink from all their shells. It's quite a lovely plant. This is one of the tea bags for that tea project. And so I also designed the tea bag. And then, of course, you see the fringe again in here. That is an aesthetic for interior people. Also, you'll see it on the planes. Some people talk about that as a practical kind of thing in terms of like insects and your movement on the land, and also like grounding you, connecting you to the land. And it's also just something you see in our kind of artistic languages. And so I decided, tea also has all this colonial history, right? And so in these projects, I wanted to kind of have these decolonial teas. And I was inspired by Brian Mulville's project, which is a World Tea Party project, and Cease Weiss, who's a Squamish artist, and her works with tea. And so in kind of thinking about those works and wanting to spend time on the land, I decided I would have, of course, my decolonial tea bag would have some fringe. So these are plants that I've harvested. Sometimes when I get invited to a residency, I'll get to harvest some things there. But I always try to bring something from home, and then we make these brews. And, those had various successes in terms of the quality of the tea. But we get together. I also often collaborate with a ceramicist, and we make a custom vessel, and I draw out the plants. And so it's this really long process of spending time with plants and valuing what the land offers us. I'm engaged in also learning cedar root basketry. So this is a beginning of a stuk, a cedar root basket. And I find all kinds of beauty and metaphor within this practice. I'm taught by elder artist Dolores Purdyby, who's a master basketry artist in my community. And we are always trying to support Dolores, having her come do classes. We have a group of us who's been working for about 2 years to learn from Dolores, supporting her, and then also working with some language development for the curriculum for basketry. And so this work is mostly grounded in the community. I'm showing a few of these images today, and I don't always show them in my artist talks because that work has a special place, and it doesn't necessarily... it's work that I want to keep circulating within the community, and that I want it to be cared for. But I wanted to show it because, we're harvesting. When we get on the land, we're asserting our land rights. So when I make a gallery on the land, I am continuing my ancestors' fight for our lands. When I harvest from the land, we are using our systems, our knowledges, and our governance for that. And so this is not seeking permits. This is not, asking parks. This is taking the space that our ancestors have always used and learning from that. And part of that is also hide tanning. So I'm also been learning hide tanning for a number of years. This is a moose hide. And so this is a class we had with Brian here from Moose Hide Factory Inc., and they're up in Fort Mac, Alberta. We have also worked with people directly from our community, but we don't have a lot of moose hide practices right directly in our community, so sometimes we're bringing in teachers from nearby. And Brian Bird and his wife came down, and we had a really great session with them learning. They process hundreds of moose hides, and they've got an incredible setup. We just did 2 in a kind of usually 4-day kind of residency, 4 or 5 days. It's an incredible amount of work, hide tanning. It's also this incredible transformation that happens, and there's a number of Indigenous artists and scholars who are positioning hide tanning as this theoretic. The theory is really through the practice, and the moose hide itself as the teacher, and or other hides, and this softening. So one of the main things you're doing in tanning hides is softening them. And so I'm going to say that I'm going to remember this artist's name in a minute and cite them. But this idea of softening is really important. And working together is really important when you're doing hide tanning. And it's a multi-step process and is also really sensitive to the conditions on the land. And so you can do some of this process inside. Some people like to do some of their softening inside so you can control the warmth and the conditions. But otherwise, you're working in summer. But you don't want to be fleshing in summer because the bugs are bad. So there's like all these ways that the knowledge is encoded in the land for this process. And it may be basketry and hide tanning may be some of the toughest mediums that I've spent years learning, as well as dedication to language. And it speaks to how much labor there is in supporting and how much time and monetary value is needed. I'm always getting grants and different things in order to support practices that were actively suppressed, oppressed, erased under, and continue to be under colonization. So under the Indian Act, under the residential school system that stole languages, that stole practices, museum collections where our art practices are, in a collection and not in direct relation to us anymore. And all these things affect our living practices. And so I'm really engaged in thinking about how to visit, how to enact, and how to enable, it's a good word, these practices. And to do that not as an individual artist, but as a way that I can share that with others. And so we're stretching this hide. People do, more, this is up north, there's more moose and people have more practices, and they really do cool things. Like when they're softening, they'll, everybody be holding the hide, and I don't know if you've seen this, but they'll toss people up like a trampoline kind of, and that helps to soften the hide. It's quite fun. This is just working on that hide. It's a big animal. So when we're doing moose in particular, it's a lot of work. This is another piece that is in this really urban location. So this is in Toronto. This was a project for the Bentway, which is under an overpass of a highway. So I talked a little bit about Bush Gallery in that context I work from. And then sometimes I get these wildly different contexts. And I really like to have a language that works across these different kinds of spaces, because I don't want to be pigeonholed in a certain kind of way. And also because in the city, we're always on land in some form, I love this saying. I love hearing your guys' saying for always was, always will be Aboriginal land. And that's always under our feet, and same at home. And so, so I was thinking about that for this project. We were to work with this idea of shade, and there's some ways in which I'll show, this is a two-part project, so there's some ways that it works more directly with shade, but I started to think about shade plants that would have been in a forest in these areas, which are Anishinaabe territories and territories for the Mississaugas of the New Credit. But I wasn't necessarily in direct relationship with those folks. So I was developing this project, and so my way of kind of paying my respects is to think about native plants there, to think about this beautiful little flower is what started this project. It's called hepatica. It's a wildflower in Ontario that doesn't grow where I am. And it also had this interesting history in terms of how it was written about in early medical literature. And it's also in all these places. So it's also this multicultural kind of flower. It isn't part of all these other ecosystems. And it was written about in this document called the Doctrine of Signatures, which was an early kind of pseudoscientific but beautifully illustrated volume about plant medicines. And the hepatica was associated with the liver because the shape of its leaf, and it turns this kind of deep red color later in the fall. And so I went on this whole tangent about hepatica flowers and liver and these illustrations, and these were all on this reflective material under the overpass. And then I decided that the plants would be empowered to have protest slogans and draw our attention in a way that animated them and gave them agency. And so I developed some slogans that were meant to be if they were from a plant's perspective. So this one is no system, but the ecosystem. And the other part of this project this is the hepatica flower, it would be depicted in beadwork. I'm wearing some, beadwork reference here. I don't work a lot with bead work, but in terms of Indigenous artists within the Americas, maybe globally, people are doing amazing things with beadwork, and I'm usually an observer in terms of the actual beading. I mean, I can do it a little bit, but anyway, I wanted these to be like beadwork, but expanded on this big scale. So this is under another section of the overpass, and it's really quite a dramatic urban scale. You know, it's like these columns that are beside us, but a bit taller and squared off, and they're like 50 feet in the air. And so I wanted this idea of hepatica, which is a very small flower that comes out after the snow melts, to be kind of writ large. It's also not there anymore because of this kind of infrastructure. And so I wanted it to be kind of like expanded onto this underpass. And so I did that by using gobo lights, which are like only 55 millimeters. These little circular gobo lights are used for like lots of advertising and things. Sometimes if you see, you know, a restaurant and it's got one of those gobo lights with their name on it right on the sidewalk, that's the technology for this. But I mapped it to this underpass and was able to kind of use two gobo lights to throw this like, you know, hundreds of feet and 50 feet in the air. And so this one was up for a while in Toronto. And it was called The Declaration of the Understory. I forgot the title. And so, again, it was really thinking about the rights of the plants. I was referring to a Secwépemc document called The Declaration of the Understory, which was written after a lot of the wildfires in 2021, and particularly the Skitchison First Nation, which is a Secwépemc community. They wrote this declaration of the understory because a lot of commercial pickers were coming in to get morel mushrooms, which grow on our land after fires, and they wanted to assert cultural protocol and how some of those were harvested and who could harvest them. And it was this interesting space between, like, there's lots of mineral rights that are claimed and different things, and there's lots of timber rights, but actually there was this kind of mid-zone of the understory that wasn't particularly, you know, subject to policy and claim in the same way. And so they wrote this really beautiful document, and it translated into Secwépemc, and it was a way for me to think through these relationships to lands. And these are huckleberries, and they're the best. And I mean, you guys probably have some good ones too, but I'm just saying for us, these are like the royalty of berries. And I'm picking them in a birch bark basket, and this is an activity I engage in with my dad, with my children. It gives us so much joy, it gives us nourishment, and it's also, for me, an aesthetic practice. You know, it's a practice of beauty on the land, it's a practice of connection on the land, and it's something I always do. It's a pattern, it's a routine, in that is a land claim. Within that is the ways that we continue to share and benefit from the land and make connections in ways that I think are powerful for us, but are a powerful example for everyone else too, in terms of the relationships we need and the ways that we need to develop better relations, reciprocity, respect for our natural environments. This is a recent work. I might not say too much about it. It's again working with reflective materials and basketry. It was earlier work with this idea coming from this plant's perspective and slogan. So this is another one I used, Free the Forest. And that's thinking about living forestry. So when we collect roots and we collect bark for basketry, the tree is living, and I think a lot about the ways in which Indigenous knowledge has really great models for resource use, including, you know, those things are actually discarded by commercial forestry. And so I'm thinking about living forestry. This is like a bit of a psychedelic berry bush image that I had. This was for a festival in Revelstoke. I'm going to skip to this installation. So I do work at University of British Columbia. I have been working as an assistant professor for about 7 years, now associate professor. I work with the gallery on campus here in the Okanagan, as well as on the Vancouver campus. And we have Orange Shirt Day on September 30th, and it's a day that is a national day. It's a day off, like a statutory holiday. So hard to call it a holiday, but a statutory day where Canadians are asked to think about the residential schools and to think about reconciliation. And so it's a hard day, though, to be at the university and to know how residential school has affected my family intergenerationally, and then just see all the dynamics and the dialogue of it in the institutional experience. And so sometimes we're asked, like, okay, what are you guys doing that we can promote, which is great, but it's like, what are you doing? Also, like, I wish it was happening in a way that I could be like, oh, they're doing that, and that's great, and we don't have to do everything. And that, that does exist in a smaller way. But I had been asked one of these times if there was any programming we were doing. And we do this really amazing program, which is an Indigenous artist intensive residency. We bring in guest Indigenous faculty, but it happens in May to June when nobody else is on campus. And it never gets any attention or support, and I'm continually groveling and finding money for it. And so when I'm asked, like, am I doing programming in September? I'm like, well, we did 2 months, we did 2 months that nobody paid attention to a while ago. But it is important to also have a kind of non-institutional response, I think. So anyway, in thinking through that and moving through my cynicism, to also realize that, there's some good things. I've been supported in my career in really important ways by my position. And so I found my way to a project which I call the Hummingbird Project, and we make these flags. I'm inspired by hummingbirds, which are regular visitors at home. They're such powerful spirits. They're also really territorial, They're also really territorial and strong, and this is, I started this project. This was coming after 2021 when the 215 unmarked graves or potentially unmarked graves were found at Kamloops Indian Residential School, which is directly in my home territory. And these were it kind of made international news at the time, but many elders had these stories for many years from their experiences of children who were lost at residential school. And so there was a lot happening in that time frame, and this project came to me as something I could do that was not just asking people to study history, or it was it was a way we could be active together and be active in a kind of memorial that was also about us coming together. And so we would do these workshops, and everybody would do a small hummingbird, and then we would depict them as these flags on the university grounds. And so they would be installed for just a couple days to coincide with the National Day for Reconciliation. This is installation for the Sobey Art Award in Ottawa. This is a project called Surrounding, but I'm gonna that's it animated. So was really excited by Vicky's project last night and that animation of the fire. This project is thinking through similar kinds of things. And it's always fun to bring it around and to really mark space by being able to have a fire. Sometimes that's a ceremonial fire, sometimes it's a gathering fire. This is recent work that is, up at the Polygon, which is a gallery that is looking at photographic practice. Let me finish talking here. In Vancouver, which was Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territories. And this is a large-scale exhibition, and what I've done here is, so alongside learning cedar root basketry, I've also been studying cedar root basketry in collections, and so baskets that are in museum collections, often made by Indigenous women, often not named as artists. And so in thinking through this for the last decade of my practice, I wanted to open up all the windows in the gallery, and they're all printed with this kind of graphic gesture and detail images of cedar root basket designs. And these are quite huge. And then this is also in the show. It's also recent work looking at using crystals as lenses and looking through the land. I wanted to point to a continuum of elder artist Mary Thomas, who's passed away now, but who worked in cedar root basketry and really did a lot of work to uphold Secwépemc and Indigenous artworks. This is some of the folks at home who I work with in basketry. So I mentioned it's not just me, it's community. This is also part of the installation at Polygon. I talked about wildfire a bit, and this work was really responding to being on evacuation alert, and when you have to grab all your valuables and be ready to leave. And I'm always questioning systems of value in my work. And so I was, in the moment, I was grabbing all of these baskets that I have first, and then this work came later in thinking about what we value and thinking about home in different ways. This is, again, a subject of basketry. This is an archival image of baskets in the interior. And in this exhibition, I'm also thinking about historical photography and the problematics of historical photography, because it's usually images of us, not by us. And so this image is actually, it's hard to see here, but it's tiled together over sheets of sandpaper. And so I'm looking at sandpaper as a way to carry this abrasiveness and difficulty and signal of the labor involved in kind of resituating some of these historical images. Sorry, I'm going fast because I just want to get through a couple images so we can also have a chance to talk. This is another series called Snowbank and Other Investments, and this is in the same show. I've been on a bit of a blur where I opened this show and then came and was at the Sydney Biennale, and then now I'm here. So I actually haven't had a chance to talk about this work that much, but it was a series I started a number of years ago that is really about valuing land over intrinsic and spiritual values versus monetary values, because this land is devalued because it's under the Indian Act when it's on reserve, my land. And so I use all these financial terms, but images of activity on the land. So you have some berries here in the basket again, and this financial term of annual return. This is another installation within the exhibition at Polygon in Vancouver, which is called photolithics. And so this title, photolithics, is a term the curator Monika Shefzik and assistant curator Serena Steele and I came up with for thinking about the ways in which I'm engaging in photographic practices. I'm trying to undermine photography. I'm trying to use the earth itself as a lens to understand it. I just threw this in. These are two mentors, Lawrence Paul Yahweh-Lepton and Dana Claxton, who have taught me a lot in my work. When we opened the show, we got to have a little ceremony, and I finished these sitsu'ui, those moccasins, with the hides that I worked on. And that's like, that's like a process of years. So I'm just gonna show it. This is a large-scale film installation inside kind of a model of a Ixten, which is an underground home, which is part of our traditional architecture. And because we opened up all the windows of the gallery, which is hardly ever happens, they're usually closed in an exhibition, then we had the challenge of mounting a video work when we had flooded the gallery with light. And so the gallery was really amazing, the installation crew, Alex in particular, and they built this to my kind of imaginings to shelter a work, which is an ethnographic film that I screen through crystals. And this is another version of the basketry work that's happening in the show. And I'm just going to get to this to end off, which is the work that's on at Sydney Biennial, curated by Hur El-Qasimi, and in Gadigal land, and it just opened. So you can see here, maybe you can't see, but I'm using these slogans again. So these are survey tape, power to the plants. It's at a power plant. It's at a White Bay Power Station, which is a historic coal-burning power plant. And then, and free the forest. And it really was a continuation of thinking about plants and thinking about what makes up coal, which are ancient plants. And so this work, it becomes an intervention in the architecture of the building. I always use survey tape in my work because it indicates a process of land dispossession. So one of the first large-scale expeditions in Canada was the Geological Survey of Canada. And that survey, surveyed the land for Canada versus looking at where our land was. And it really was a process of dispossession of land. And so survey tape and survey always has that language for me. And so I'm thinking about that. These were some of the designs. I was really thinking about the plants that make up coal, and then also they kind of form into these wallpaper designs, referencing arsenic wallpaper, which was in the colonial period when coloring on wallpaper was made with toxic chemicals that when they became damp, they made people sick. And so I was thinking about these ways in which we're using fuels like coal and the ways that we're getting sick and what could be the power of plants to change that if we had a better pattern of reciprocity and respect within them. And I'll close on this image because we're here talking about future memorials. And this is a work, this is a Bush Gallery work, so that's with other artists, including Gabriel Hill and Peter Morin. And this is a quote from Haudenosaunee Tuscarora scholar Jolene Ricard. And I got to interview her for this Indigenous artist residency I was mentioning. And she said this thing that really struck me. We were talking about monuments in different ways. And I was she was talking about heirloom corn and her practices and her people and planting of corn. And she said this thing. She said, plants as monuments. And all of a sudden I was like, this thing she said is amazing because it made me think about these areas of wildflowers around me. And people come and hike the mountains and see the wildflowers, but they're all plants that we dig and use for food. And they come back every year. And I realized when she was saying this that like plant life as monuments was such an interesting thing to me because it is a living ecology. It's not a bronze statue. It's like a way of living, a way of connecting to land. And so I made this work, and it's made from fireweed leaves and sun printing. It's not cyanotype. It's actually another kind of photosensitive material. And it's on recycled teepee canvas. So we had a teepee studio for a while, but it came down in a windstorm, but we were reusing all the pieces of that teepee. And so this idea of plants, in particular these kinds of yellow lilies that grow around me, it struck me that they themselves were a kind of a witness and a memorial that was about the past, but also about the future, because my kids at their school, because it's a cultural school, they would go every May to dig these. And this idea also that it can disappear for a while and then come back. It just was this way of thinking that Jolene had introduced in this interview that I just thought was an area where I wanted to think more about this idea. I wanted to think of plants as monuments, as monumental, because they're also often overlooked. And yeah, they're part of these larger cycles that were interesting for me to think about in this space of the monumental. I think I have one. I don't know, we didn't test it, but this is a video, so it may not play, but it might. Anyway, it's just another detail of the installation of the work, Only Available Light. Oh, okay. It's my friend Leela Gilday, who's an amazing Dene singer who offered the soundtrack for that piece. But I just thought I'd show how it moves and how it disrupts the ethnographic frame of that documentary. The film is called The Shuswap Indians of British Columbia. It was made by an anthropologist of us, again, not for us, not by us, became itself disassociated from us. And the point I like to make about it is that it was filmed in 1927 when residential school became a requirement, while it itself was screened in Ontario to auditoriums full of children, who were absorbing this cultural view of us while our culture was being taken. And so that contrast is really what inspired the work. But I want to leave some time for questions and conversation. I'm so grateful to be here in these lands and to talk a little bit about the work, and also here to learn about this place. So Cook's Jam, thank you.
Thank you, Tania. We're having an awkward transition moment while we put some chairs up here. We're going to invite Tarryn Love to come down. Yep, there you go. And we're going to have a conversation with Tania. We're hoping to kind of wrap up at about 7:30, so yeah, we've got 35 minutes or so. But we thought we might have a little conversation with you. Oh, look, there's pre-prepared chairs. Thank you. And then after a little conversation, there'll be opportunity for you guys to ask questions. Thanks so much, Tania. That was a great talk.
Thank you, Tarryn, for being here, being in conversation.
Yeah. Hi. Oh, is this on? Can you hear me? Oh yeah, it's on. Hi everyone. My name is Tarryn. I'm a proud Gunditjmara Keerray Woorroong woman, born and raised on Woorroong country in Geelong. I am here tonight on invitation from my Auntie Vic. Sometimes it's a bit of like, I'll get a call and she's like, oh, hey, Nisi, like I got this cool project, you should come along. I'm like, yeah, sounds good. And she's like, oh, you should have a yarn with some people. I'm like, yeah, I'd love to have a yarn. And I'm like, oh, you mean like up on, but yeah, I know Auntie Vic, she has an apologies for tonight, but yeah, she's been really incredible to hear about this project. And I myself work in the space of creative cultural expression, and a lot of it is I wouldn't do the work I do without my family and the work that they've done and the knowledge that they've passed down to me. So a lot of the things you were saying I was really heavily resonating with, and it was just such an honour to hear you speak about your work, and you're so generous in sharing the knowledge around each of your pieces. Yeah, that was really awesome, thank you. The first question that I really want to start off with is talking about process. I really loved when you were saying that in a lot of your different projects, you're strategic with your curating and your making, and you're thinking about, how can I bring community along to this? Like, what can I do in the process? And you're really intentional with like what goes into the work. Something my mum will ask me sometimes when I say like, oh look, I've got this project. I've got this project, and am I too close to this microphone? I've got this project, and Mum will say, oh, where's the real work though? And I'm kind of like, oh, yeah, I get what you mean. And what we kind of talk about is prioritising process over outcome. And I think, oh yeah, this is a really cool exhibition, or this is a cool thing, but I'm really here because I've got this time and space now to like dive into language or dive down this rabbit hole of like learning about Lamandra or something. So I thought I'd just ask if that kind of prioritising process over outcome really like resonates with you in your work.
Yeah, definitely. My mic's so loud. Sorry. I'll just switch this one around. Yeah, I think I need that strategy because the kind of art funding system, the galleries, like things are changing, but I need to have that strategy, or the work is easily consumed by the patterns that already exist, right? Like, you get a solo show, great, it's your work, everything wants to shape it to be about just you, and we kind of have to be strategic in pointing to other things in the work, including the process. So yeah, I think like the audience or the communities around our art practices, want to see the outcome, but for artists, it's all the process, right? And for Indigenous art in particular, I think it's like when I talk about hide tanning, it's hard to show any of that work in a gallery context because it just can never represent the work that's in it. It's like everybody's obsessed with like whatever 30-second videos, and I'm always like, what are you, like, I have students who'll be like, oh, I made this great video of me doing this painting, and I was like, how long did it take? It's like 10 hours or whatever, and then it's in like a 10-second reel, and I'm like, doesn't that feel terrible though, to be like, this was a really long project and now it's summed up in 10 seconds. Our processes can be long when, the process of talking to your auntie, the process of having that relationship needs time. And then, the project. And so for me, I look for ways in which I can direct resources to not only myself, the ways I can be responsible. And it's imperfect, it doesn't always work great, but the ways that I can be responsible to try and create continuity and continuum. Mm-hmm. It sounds like you getting called upon is part of that. And I know when we're gathered together sometimes, and it can be customary to ask an elder to give a prayer, but my language teacher is always pointing to those who are learning because it's really great practice for them to do the prayer and for them to train, because she's always thinking about the future. I was thinking about the future processes, I guess.
Yeah, I think when Arnie Vic sometimes passes the baton down, she's always like, yeah, this is a really important intergenerational learning moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm like, okay.
Yes. And also they did all the work, and we gotta, it's our turn for our elders.
I'm very grateful. But I did make note of the moose hide because I thought that was really incredible. And thinking about process, and that process can't happen alone. Like it cannot happen alone, especially when you're working with materials like the moose hide and you're having to stretch it or you're having to gather it. And I really liked, you said that the moose hide really is the teacher, and I kind of wanted to ask you about when you're doing your physical making, working with tangible materials, what those intangible moments are with community and the learning around that are, and if that's important for you.
Yeah, definitely. The joking around, the work with the young people who are there, the work, going to get tea or water for elders who are there and checking in on them. Those are all spaces where we're learning different systems, and sometimes I'm in the world of my work at the university and trying to make space there, or at the gallery, and I like to spend time in community-centered ways where the rules are different, and that it all contributes to the ways that we do think and work collaboratively. So yeah, I can't do moose hide tanning or deer hide tanning without hunters, and hunters who are trained in being respectful to wildlife, and we can't do hunting without the deer, we can't do those practices without healthy ecologies. So, it's like pick the point in the process. It's all so connected and such a beautiful thing to be a part of. And even when maybe I'm on a down a rabbit hole, like you're saying, and doing something that I think is individual, there's usually that's coming from a place from, having an experience, like a moment when we're tanning hides, or a moment in basketry, or a moment visiting a work in the museum, in a collection, and those are all collaborative in some way.
Yeah, it makes me think of, in my family, learning possum skin cloak making, and really how many people it can take to stitch a cloak together or put the designs on, or even if you do make that cloak on your own, you're not really making it on your own because you have this ancestral knowledge behind you that you're stitching into every skin and you're putting into the designs.
And yeah, I just think that's really incredible to see. You know, my mind's been buzzing with the all the synergies and the connections, and we were yarning earlier about that same but different, and that kind of international First Nation dialogue. But I was thinking around that collective process and the idea of time. And you know, when you sit down, I see it a lot with my Auntie Bronwyn when we're in weaving circles. Sometimes she'll be sharing lots, or sometimes it'll be silence. But or even with my cousin Yaren, when I've been like a learner, apprentice in a lot of spaces with my family, where I've just been listening and making. Oh gosh, I'm sorry with the microphone. And that feeling of time can be really different when you're sitting. You know, you could be weaving for 6 hours or something like that, but it never feels as long, or it can feel longer. And the kind of space that opens up around that making for different kinds of conversations and connections to have, I think is really incredible and so much part of the process. And it's also, which might be another jump before you answer the question, but time, I was thinking about in your work, you know, and we were yarning about it earlier today, you're looking back, bringing things in from the past and looking forward, and then expressing that in the here and now, what that is for you. And so much of when I'm thinking of time in that, you know, non-linear, cyclical way, I'm thinking like, oh, you know, we're re-archiving our family knowledge, we're creating it in our lens, we're truth-telling, and we're giving, you know, like, I'm absolutely blown away by the wind, giving the wind agency to write poetry, and the wind is taking these words that were written by white anthropologists and having a voice in saying, you know, these is what I want to say with these. So just that idea of time coming up so much and in different areas of your work is just, maybe no question, just if you have any more thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of, I'm always thinking about these passages of time, and maybe, like, in maybe ways that go too deep sometimes, like, but I'm just fascinated by Earth systems, by the Earth as a creator, you know, by geological time, and how everything is impacted by, all of time together. And photography is such a time-based medium, right? But usually we think of it as short amounts of time, like, you know, I can take a picture of everyone in this room in an instant and share it around the world or whatever. And that has a certain power to it, of course, and we're in the age of that. But I'm thinking in this text I wrote for a curatorial project that was looking at historical photography and colonial photography, I started to think about, well, how long of an exposure is a stone, you know, is the earth itself, because that is an effect of light and chemistry, and so I started to think beyond maybe the kinds of limits of photography and the limits of time, and to think about ways of seeing, and seeing through the land as a kind of a lens. And does that, I mean, it's kind of a question, I guess, for me when I do it. Like, I think for me, it helps me understand an image in different ways, and it's beautiful to me as well. And I think, like, I do think it's important to have strategies to undermine photography, because especially historical photography, where we don't have agency a lot of times in it. You know, some of the postcards that I've referenced from historical images of my people, you know, they were traded widely and they were representing things without necessarily their participation. So, you know, it occupies such a trying space, and so I'm always thinking of ways to, and yet I still want to look, you know, yet I still want to look at historical images, and so how do I use them in my art practice without re-inscribing the kind of colonial histories of them? And so I try out these different ways that are often sensitive to time. And I guess because, like, when you live on the land, it's like seasons are always, you know, happening. And I mentioned the salmon run, which is important for us, and it having its own time. It's every 4 years there's a dominant run. And I notice these patterns in our stories as well, where we talk about things happening 4 times, and and these observations about time that are just encoded in our stories and lives as well, maybe in how we talk about our ancestors or our communities. And maybe, I'm pretty sure this is correct because I would always get confused. I'm a language learner, and I would get confused, but people would use this word, das galmuch, for both ancestors and future people. And I was always like, is that, they're saying the same thing? And I'm pretty sure that's correct. We have the same, it's the same word. It can mean either thing. And I think there was some relationships to some languages here in terms of time and thinking of the past and our current moment and collapsing them all.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. It was making me think, especially when you said about the stone down at Warrnambool Art Gallery on Gunditjmara country. I created a work in response to ancestral belongings that were in the gallery collections, and it was a ceremonial stone, and I kind of was thinking around this idea of ceremony, and straight away thought of Kuntapulyakin, which is our whale dreaming story, where the whales migrate, and Gunditjmara Sea Country is a place, really special birthing place, and there's a lot of people that will go down our country that way to see the whales go through the water, and on a possum skin I kind of talked about this story of Kuntapul Wayapawan, which is like meeting the whale and saying, like, in my mind, this is ceremony to me, and it's happened long before I was here, and long after me it's going to keep happening as long as we look after country and our sea country, and just this idea of time and being part of it in that small way. And I also was thinking in the way that country holds memory and time, and you know, our gum trees, whether they have scars or they've been through fires or there's regrowth, it's kind of, you know, we were yarning about it earlier today, it's almost its own photograph, and you can kind of read the clues and the markers and see what's happened and its story and the layers of history in the gum tree, which I just thought was like really beautiful of what you're sharing about how you're kind of reframing the lens of these photographs. And probably the last question that or maybe I have two, but we'll see, and then we can open up to everyone. I just have lots of questions for you, but I really loved the Bush Gallery. I thought that was awesome, and we use the bush here. Like, bush is something that we can definitely relate to. You know, it's what we call our, you know, our bush, our scrub. And I was wondering, when you decided to go out and kind of make within the Bush Gallery, what community's response was to you? Because I know it's really difficult sometimes for community to come into those white box gallery spaces, and you know, you want to ask mob to come in, but then you think, like, why are we doing it here when we have our work already happening in abundance out there? So I'm just going to take it to where the work is. And I was just wondering how, yeah, community might have responded to that, and even how that might have influenced your work.
Yeah, and it's like a variety of responses. One, like I have curated a couple shows at Bush Gallery, which is fun, and they're usually outdoor works, and so people are curious and come out. And then I've translated things into our language that are Bush Gallery and collaborated with different groups. And sometimes people are like, you know, like, what are you doing? And then and then when I kind of explain it a bit, then it makes lots of sense. But exactly, it's like part of our life practice as well to be making from the land. So sometimes naming it that is less familiar. Sometimes it's funny. Sometimes it's really liberating. When I first started thinking about it, I heard of this place called Bush University. And this is a name that was colloquially used for Deshinta, Center for Research and Technology, which is a Dene scholarship project. And I didn't know that at the time, but we were at a language class and somebody was mentioning, oh, you got invited to this Bush University thing. And I was like, what have you said? This has ignited a whole way of thinking for me in this moment when I was having trouble reconciling what I was doing at the university and what was I doing in community, and then then I just realized, like, oh, well, we can just call it a gallery. This can just be the Bush Gallery, and this gives us all the space, you know, to tease out these ideas. when we presented a work by Key Collective, a work called Light TP. It's a work that happens outside, and people have sage, which is a medicine we use for smudging, maybe a bit like the smoking here, and you hold it as well as a high beam flashlight, and eventually enough smudge smoke is in the air that the shafts of light from your flashlight look like a teepee pole. This is a work by Cheryl Rondell and Joseph Natauhau. And I had seen it performed in like city parks before, but we presented it at Bush Gallery at my home, and when a couple people from community were coming late, and they saw it, and they were trying to make out what it was, and they kind of saw the teepee shape, but they also thought we had fireworks because there were so many insects, which weren't present in the city park. But like when I took documentation images, I realized, oh, there's like all these like a lot of illuminated insects because we still have some ecology there because it's still the forest, and so yeah, it was like this beautiful moment where my niece was asking me, "Is this art, Auntie?" And we're all shuffling around with our smudge and our flashlights in the night, and then she pauses and she answers her own question. She's like, I gotta get, "Is this art?" And then she pauses and she goes, "Oh, this is good art." And she was only about 8 or something. But that was one of my best reviews.
I think that it makes me think about language specifically, which is just my last question. But that way that you've talked a lot about it through all your different pieces, how language is something that's really important to you, and in the work that you do in each process, and also thinking of Bush University or Bush Gallery, like the way that mob, and I see it a lot here, can almost use humour in a way to manipulate the language that's been imposed on us to like remake it our own again and give it new meaning and new life and kind of reclaim it. But yeah, I just wanted to think about your physical making and your language learning and how important that process is for you.
Yeah, for me, learning language has been like transformational. Because I think like I might be thinking about using the earth as a lens when I use a crystal or something, but like what's really changing my way of thinking and changing me has been language. I think that it has a resonant way of changing you, not only speaks to our ancestry and our spirit, but also is incredibly transformational in how we look at the world. And I've had many amazing teachers in Secwépemc, and I'm still not great anyway. But what it has taught me, especially from learning from elders who are first language speakers in particular, the late Mona Jules, I just realized how specific and complex, and yeah, it was just like exciting to learn, and actually like really really descriptive and beautiful, so that it's a very Indigenous languages, they're so connected that like for me there's some things that are so visual in the language, which is deeply inspiring. It also gives me new ways to think and work by just learning language. Like I remember we learned the word for bead, a bead, and it's zoot, 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 zoot. And when Mona explained it, Elder Mona Jules in the class, I was like, whoa, my mind is blown in this moment, because the word comes from what a dewdrop looks like on a leaf. When it has to be a certain kind of leaf, when it's like, when that dewdrop is like perfectly spherical. And I just was like, this is an entirely different way of thinking and seeing that, for me, it's just like has some limitless beauty. And like, I love hearing languages here, and I'm really committed to them, not like for us first, but also they're again, I'll quote Jeanette Armstrong, like sounds of their language come from the land. And she'll talk very specifically about like, this sound comes from the sound of the water. this sound in our alphabet comes from the sound of this bird, and that is such a deep relationship that I think, and we all have different languages that are from places where our ancestors lived, and I think they're deeply important archives of knowledge about landscapes, about ecologies, and the way we've kind of monocultured language it has repercussions in the same way that a monoculture of plant life or animal life has. And I think I'm a believer in that diversity, that the ecology itself is a diverse system, and that our languages are a part of that. And so I find them endlessly beautiful. I love hearing people's languages, and I always like to say, in case anybody's listening, we need more money, we need more time, to really bring back languages and the specific and incredible knowledges they contain for ourselves first, and for also sharing we don't get enough of that, and it's really challenging. But also, for me, I like to think about them as futurity. So I was mentioning, like, technically our languages and those who are first language speakers is endangered. But I like to think of my kids and their learning for some amazing language warriors, like the Chief of Tom School back home, that allowed my kids to be in immersion. And so I think of it as our future as well. But that's not without its challenges, because they're in public school and they're teenagers, and they're less interested in that. And that's like the reality of the kinds of public systems around us, even when they're changing and trying to do something different. And so we need more time, we need more money, we need more support to bring back the beauty of languages.
Thank you for sharing about that. I know with my Auntie Vic, amongst the millions of things that she does, language is a really core life work that she's really staunch with, and in our family such a knowledge holder in. And just the way that you're talking about language and what it teaches and holds, I can't think of the words, probably stage fright up here, but like in our language, the words for nose can come up in the words for hills, or the words for your eyes come up in the words for stars. And it's so interconnected to country, to kin, to people, it's so relational in that it holds culture and teaches, just in those specific ways that country is a being and it must be respected. Country is living and breathing country. So it's so many things, I have a little niece and nephew, and I just think so much, like I look up to my Auntie Vic, and I hope that, I'm like, like my little niecey, like that's what, my relationship is to my auntie, and I hope I can then be part of this conversation in learning what's being passed down to me and keep on passing it down. So thank you for really letting me just like hijack that and ask you all the questions that I've been wanting to ask you. But thanks for having me up here, and maybe we can, if there's any other questions in the room or comments that we want to,
Thanks so much.
That's right, I turned this off because I thought it was making the terrible sound. I told you didn't need me on stage. Anyway, I'm just here as the white settler, modelling what listening looks like.
Some grounding over here. I was like, I felt supportive. I like it. It was good.
I was just thinking actually what you were saying, Tarryn, before. Auntie Vicky said to me just before I went to Canada, she's like, if you meet any language people, like we need connect. And I was like, right, well, I've taken that to task. I brought Tania over. Does anyone have a question? We have about 10 minutes. I can ask Tania questions anytime, so I think it's your turn. Yeah, great.
I can hear you. Yeah, we can hear you.
I just want to ask about your approach to, because you have such a wide range of practice. I was curious about your approach to using more like colonial technologies like photography, like installation and things, sort of, yeah, what's your process in dealing with that?
I am usually working, the idea is first, and then I decide what form it's going to take. And so, I don't really spend time thinking like, oh, this is this kind of tool, or this comes from this history. I just they're part of the tools I have to realize things. And sometimes I'll be really specific, like in the past I've done projects when I used to do some more printmaking work, and it would be like, I'm going to do this project in relief carving, because I'm drawing on traditions of political organizing and posters and the kind of democratic medium, and then sometimes I'm using stones and projectors together, and it's I guess it's like a compression of time that is moving forward and backward as well in those mediums, because many of our screens and technologies do use quartz crystals, and really a lot of the technological changes of visual material have been through glass, and which first was through transparent stones. So they have current uses too, right? In modern technologies. So and so it just depends on the kind of point, or I'm an artist too. It's like I'm working with, I'm like, oh, this thing looks really beautiful, and the layers of meaning about that material are really interesting to me. So, and that's why I have there's work in sandpaper, and there's work in photography, and there's work, in different mediums. But I think that they're ideas, and then these ideas need a form, and I'm usually making decisions about the material based on the idea. That answers your question. So try to create that through line between the concept and the material.
I think I can actually speak without the mic. It helps the recording. Oh,
okay, right.
Well, thank you. Firstly, it was so enriching, and on many, many levels. Thank you, Tania. My question is arcing on a particular word, diaspora, and my family's from South India. I'm born in the UK and bred in Naarm, and all my life here I've reached out through different art practices into these stories, into these memories, and what I wanted to ask you was the word diaspora related to your background, and whether people from your country also feel this growing up in different parts of the US or anywhere else in the world, and if you could talk a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Sure. In the ways I situate Bush Gallery, I'm really interested in those being really inclusive spaces as well. I myself am from settler and Indigenous backgrounds. I think the place of challenging and rich discussion is a really generative space. And so I think I was also finding in my curatorial work, it was either I was working in the white cube, or I was working with only Indigenous artists, and I was like, I'm a curator. I work with artists, wherever they're from, the interesting things that are happening. And so I tried to kind of create these spaces that can be inclusive. There's like where I live particularly is quite rural, and so diasporic experience is there is less diversity where I am for sure. It's like a bit more frontier in terms of most of the population is white settler or Indigenous. And then I also work in urban spaces where we're all coming together from many different places. So I don't work, like it's not my experience. And so because my Canadian side, my settler side is like not diasporic in the sense that it doesn't have an ongoing connection, that it is really part of a settler trajectory that was about remaking itself and not connecting to ancestral homes or the past or languages, because there's Gaelic language in lots of different ways. So I mean, I don't know if I'm this is like if I'm answering or in speaking to these kinds of histories, but like there's such deep histories of colonization in so many places, right? And diaspora, often indicates that there has been turmoil and conflict, and both in the land and between people, and then when your homelands become unsafe or people just decide to move around. Like I'm also like, the rights we have to move on the land are really important for different groups of people. So I don't know if you're asking like, how do we all come together from all these different places?
So when you move from a particular country, which is the place where traditional knowledge is sort of speaking to that ecosystem that you discussed, when you move away from that, or where there's others that have moved away from that, I wanted to try to compare my experience, which is intergenerationally moving away, but how that could be rekindled, and how people live with these experiences.
I mean, I'm always thinking about, and like when I'm in other Indigenous territories too, that is so relational. And I think that no matter what justice we're seeking, you can't do it without speaking to original injustices of colonization on the lands of Indigenous territories. But I also think that we all carry our lands with us as well, because they shape us, right? Our lands shape us. They shape our languages, they shape our practices, they shape what we look like in many different ways. They shape us. And so in that way of compressing time, that's how I think about it, is I just think we all carry our lands and ancestors with us, and then how we engage and build relations where we are is really important, and it has to start in places like, in my opinion, in Canada and Australia. It has to start with Indigenous peoples and territories, and addressing original injustices and ongoing injustices in that dynamic, and we do that not by becoming a monoculture in some ways. We do that, I think. I think it's important that we all connect to family, ancestry, place, in terms of how we understand ourselves in relationship. But yeah. Now, but I'm interested to talk more, because that's my experience has been this different one with settler identities and Indigenous identities, and I think it's super important. And there's been such groundbreaking work when people from different diasporic experience come together to talk about those experiences and what we can build together, and diasporic from all places. Yeah. Thanks.
I'm getting a time cue from Chloe. Do you reckon one more question? And then, I mean, Tania's been up here on this stage for some time. Why don't we take it across the road? We've got a heap of catering. all of you came over, there'd still be too much. So you have to come over. And there's also a little bit of a drinks tab. So yeah, come join us. Is it level 2 or something? Yeah, level 2 of Oxford Scholar. So don't go into the actual bar. There's a little elevator on the right-hand side, and if you go upstairs, and you can hang out with us. Sorry, Chloe's trying to tell us this. Thank you so much for everyone for coming and listening and coming out on this. I think it's a very busy night tonight on Thursday, so thank you for coming to this event, and we really appreciate it. Cheers.
Thank you.
And thank you, Tania. And thank you, Tarryn. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tarryn. Thank you, Amy. Thank you all for listening. Thank you, everyone who put everything together, is handling mics and everything. Thank you.